Really privileged to have Shauna here with us. Shauna, many of us in this room would be familiar with what feels like 2 decades or more of warnings and conversation from the Maldives, explaining to the international community the risks that your nation faces from climate change. Given that passage of time, how do things look now? What are we seeing in terms of the intensity of those risks? Are we seeing things worsen dramatically?
Thank you so much, and it's a privilege to be here and to speak on something that is very personal to me as well. For me, as someone from the Maldives, climate change is not something that will happen. And we have been saying this throughout my entire life as well. Politicians, presidents, ministers from the Maldives has repeatedly spoken about the threats of climate change, particularly on small islands. And I don't have very good news about what has happened more recently. We are seeing record temperatures almost every month. Every week is warmer than it was last week. We have more rain, we have more flooding, we have more coral reef bleaching than we ever used to see. So the impacts is something that I have been living. That is what my everyday life looks like. That is what it is to be living in an island nation.
Well, let's talk about some of the ways in which your nation has looked for help with solutions. We'll come on to the role of business in the private sector. Before we do, you spent time as Minister of the Environment. What was your experience in dealing with the rest of the international community, with developed nations, with multinational organizations?
Well, the Rio Summit was initially, we came up with the Rio Summit when I was in first grade. And here, about 30 years later, I was negotiating for the Maldives as the minister, fighting to establish a fund that we started to talk about back in 1990s. A fund that would help countries like the Maldives to assist us with the kind of loss and damage that we see with every rainy season. And just in Glasgow, we started to talk about it. And in Egypt, we agreed that we would establish a fund. The fund is still not operational.
And for those unfamiliar with how that fund will operate, and when it does, how will that benefit? How will that deliver a benefit to the Maldives?
Well, I think often when we think about loss and damage, people think that this is a major hurricane, a major typhoon that's going to tear down an entire island or a coastal area. But loss and damage is a lot more complex than that. We're not talking about disaster relief. We're not talking about disaster reduction. And what happens when small islands or coastal areas do experience extreme weather events is far beyond what we see in the aftermath of a hurricane season, for instance. I'll give you an example. In the Maldives, we are a coral reef nation, and we have very vibrant marine life. But with what happened over the years with global warming, with El Niños, is the percentage of coral cover in the Maldives has gone down with every bleaching that has killed our coral reefs, basically. So those are the slow onset impacts of climate change. That's equally loss and damage for us because we are a nation that is so dependent on coral reefs for fishing and for tourism as well. So what happens to small islands when they lose their coral reefs is equally loss and damage. Yeah. And it's not just like a disaster that takes away an entire island instantly. And so we really need to be imaginative and understanding of what it means to have the impacts of climate change and on coastal cities, on coastal areas, and particularly small island nations.
Quite. I think that brings us to the potential for solutions, the opportunities that presents for the private sector, for business. I mean, talk us through how you see that. You know, what are the opportunities for businesses, private organizations to become involved in adaptation efforts, in restoration? How can they play a part?
Well, the ocean serves goods and services to about 3 billion people in the world. We have about over 300 billion assets that's in coastal areas. The world economy, from the blue economy, from ocean resources, we are contributing about $1.5 trillion to the global economy. Millions of people are employed from services from the ocean. That's where the opportunity lies. And that's where the risk is as well. And there's so much going on what can be invested in ocean resources, such as sustainable food industry, the energy that we could harness from ocean resources, even coastal protection, innovative coastal protection measures that can be utilized in islands like the Maldives. There's so many solutions we could look into. I think we often take it for granted what kind of services the ocean provides. If you think about it, 90% of global trade is on the ocean. If you think about all the mobile services that we have, how I can speak to you, how I can speak to someone in the US now, all those communication lines, submarine cables are laid under the sea. So that's the kind of resources, the services that the ocean provides. But from the $1.5 trillion that it contributes to the global economy, only about 1% of that is reinvested back to protect this ocean that provides so much stability and equilibrium for the climate and for the global economy and the entire financial system as well. What happens when there is extreme weather, when there's prolonged extreme weather, and that completely suspends transport networks? Mm-hmm. What happens when bottom trawling and deep sea mining somehow has a damage on one of the cables? That might have a blackout in the system as well. And this is why it's so critical for us to reinvest the finance into sustainable solutions to preserve and maintain the ecological integrity of these resources as well.
What are some of the specific opportunities, programs that the Maldives are working on now? Obviously, I recognise you're no longer holding a government position at the moment, but what are some of the specific things that the Maldives is looking to business, to look into the international community to come in and help finance or help execute?
If you look into just Maldives alone, our adaptation, just the coastal adaptation requirement of the Maldives is about $8 billion.
Right.
And it costs us about $3,000 per linear meter to protect each island's coastal zones. Shore protection is extremely expensive. What are the kind of solutions that we can look into to protect our islands? There is a lot of research that's going on in terms of combining nature-based solutions with hard engineering solutions to give our islands more stability and more resilience, and our ability to protect our islands against coastal flooding and tidal swells and coastal erosion as well. I'll just give you an example I think before that, I wanted to highlight, I think, yes, we are extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. From the 1998 El Nino, that was the first time we had mass bleaching, mm-hmm. to 2016 bleaching and the bleaching that we're even going on right now. The first time we lost about 98% of our coral cover. In 2016, by 2016, we had recovered our coral reefs because coral reefs are extremely resilient as well. Mm. Nature has a way to adapt to the impacts of climate change, but the problem is the pace of climate change is higher than nature's ability to adapt to the impacts as well. So what has happened, there's a lot of interest in research that is being done on how corals are adapting to these changes. But there's also incredibly less amount of finance that's invested into this kind of research. That is the problem. But what we are seeing is the mortality rate of coral from 1998 to 2016 to other heating and warming events is also declining. So that's the opportunity that we're seeing, is that are we finding more resilient ways that corals are adapting to these changes? There are also research that's being done. The Maldives Coral Institute is working with Professor Harrison from Australia, actually, where they're using coral larvae, basically, and spraying it and encouraging diversification of coral mating and basically making it more resilient. Also, there is research by one of the resorts in the Maldives, Shauna Aminath, where they are investing in coral research on more heat-tolerant coral. So stressing the corals by increasing the temperature, and once that is achieved, moving it back to the reef. So there is a lot of interesting opportunities that's being looked into from a scientific point of view. But this needs to match with the finance. This kind of science needs to be integrated into the financial systems as well, for us to be able to develop financial instruments to scale and to really help island nations like the Maldives to adapt in time.
Yeah, I mean, one mechanism, one tool that we've seen deployed on a very small scale in places like Hawaii, for example, is coral reef insurance, a type of parametric insurance where, the recipient then gets funding to finance restoration work. How's the Maldives approaching that? Clearly that's something that your nation's looking at. What are those discussions? How do you see that progressing?
That's really interesting, because there are some countries that's currently looking into parametric insurance of coral reefs. And yes, the Maldives is working with the UNDP, and the central government is currently working on developing such a policy for the Maldives as well, because our coral reefs is what we have. It contributes over 50% to our GDP as well. It's directly and indirectly related to our economic development and our fisheries sector as well. So it is absolutely imperative for us to be able to look into developing innovative financial instruments to sustainably manage and restore, for instance, in major bleaching events. Can this kind of insurance schemes kick in with an El Nino, with the bleaching, when a certain threshold passes, this is what's going to happen. When when temperature in the Maldives, for instance, goes beyond 40 degrees Celsius, can we have an insurance scheme that kicks in, and where that insurance will pay for the restoration? So that's where the research and the technology kicks in. That's where there is a business opportunity for restoration and investing in nature as well. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking into in Aura as well, where my role currently as a member of board in Aura is how could we match these kind of investments into investable opportunities, where we're looking into the target is to channel over $500 million to these kind of investable opportunities, and looking into innovative financial instruments to invest in nature. And by doing that, we could really increase the resilience of these coastal communities too.
And what's the experience been so far in terms of the reception from the investor community, insurance sector? Are these opportunities that they are keen to take up and see a value with?
I mean, from my experience as a minister, as well as working with the business community, I think there is no disagreements on whether this is happening or not. So everyone is they understand the urgency. People understand that there are opportunities for it. And that's why there is an incredible amount of research that is going into these areas, but just not enough. That 1% of investments that's going into the ocean, we need to turn that around. If we invest $6 billion on coastal defense that is in line with climate impacts, we could save $300 billion in 15 years. And that's where the insurance and the risk modeling are currently failing to incorporate into. Although it is not yet happening, what I have seen is people are starting to talk about it. And the rating agencies really need to come into it, because just how countries are downgraded on debt issues, companies and industries and countries need to be downgraded on investing in industries that is killing the planet, basically. So that's what at Aura we're doing, is bringing in the finance, bringing in the insurance, bringing in the government and the civil society together to develop a blue financial marketplace where we could really work on this together. You can't do this in silos. If the banks have to be involved in this, the insurers have to be involved in this, government policies have to be involved in this, and we need a climate treaty as well to be able to really make a legally binding climate treaty and a legally binding high seas treaty and a biodiversity treaty that will achieve the 30 by 30 goal that we have all pledged to do, because it's just too risky for us to keep avoiding, keep ignoring this, because the ocean is what stabilizes, nature is what stabilizes, and we don't have a planet B. And it's not just the Maldives, it's going to be all of us. We're all in the same boat in this together.
You've been in the room, those kinds of international negotiations. You know, you've probably still got the scars from some of those. I mean, you know, what are the prospects that we could see those kinds of international treaties agreed to?
I have always advocated for us to agree on these today, because it was yesterday that we should have agreed on these treaties. It was yesterday that we could have agreed on the problems that we face. What I have seen, what I have experienced, is it's really not the lack of finance. It's really not the lack of technology. It's the politics that needs to be sorted. It's the political will, and it's more than a climate problem. It's a geopolitical problem that needs to be resolved before we can really have a climate treaty. Can we do this? And I think we can, because politics can be resolved by people sitting together in a room and having a conversation. That conversation needs to happen before we can have that climate treaty.
Shauna, that's great. That's a positive message to end on. There's prospects for treaties, there's opportunities for business as well. Please do join me in thanking Shauna for being with us today. Thank you, Shauna.